Controlling fiancé forced me to sign a disgusting contract about my family the night before our wedding, so I humiliated him by reading it aloud in front of everyone. Okay, Reddit, I need to get this off my chest. I'm 28, and I'm a dentist. I met this guy, Gene, 28M, on a dating app. We went on a few dates, and I quickly started to see some things I didn't like. The first date was at a really trendy bar. Gene ordered a lot of expensive drinks for himself and his friends, and he put it all on his own tab without asking me if I wanted anything specific. I just had water, and he made a comment about it. He said, "Don't worry, I like a girl who knows her limits. It's cute." He gave me a wink, but I didn't feel like he was being nice. It felt like he was looking down on me. The second date was at a loud nightclub. Gene spent most of the night talking to other women. While I was getting us drinks, he was very obviously flirting with a blonde woman in a tight dress. When I got back, he didn't even notice me for several minutes. He finally saw me, grabbed his drink, and didn't even say, "Thank you." I told him I felt uncomfortable, and he told me I should loosen up and learn to have some fun. The third date was dinner at a regular restaurant. He spent the whole time talking about his family's money and his plans for the future with their business. He didn't ask me much about my work or my life. Then, he said something about my job that bothered me. He said, "Dentistry, huh? That's adorable. My mom always wanted me to marry a doctor, but I guess a dentist is close enough. She'll be thrilled." I realized we were very different. I like quiet evenings, reading, and things like that. Gene was clearly a very social person who enjoyed bars and clubs. I don't have anything against people who like to party, it's just not for me. I work at a well-known hospital, so I'm doing pretty well in my career. Gene, on the other hand, was going to inherit his father's business. After those dates, I stopped answering his texts. He sent me a few messages that got angrier and angrier. The last one called me boring and uptight, and he said I was probably just jealous of girls who know how to have a good time. A few months went by. Then, I saw him again at a friend's birthday party. It was at a quiet, upscale lounge, which is more my kind of place. At first, Gene just kind of looked at me from across the room with a little smile. But then, he came over and apologized for those texts. He blamed it on having a bad day and drinking too much tequila. He was being very charming, paying a lot of attention to me, and even pretending to remember things I'd told him about my job on our first date. He got some details wrong, though. We spent the whole party together. We left together, but just as friends. Soon after, he asked me out again. He suggested a quiet dinner at a nice restaurant that's known for its food and wine. It seemed like he was actually trying to do something I would enjoy. He said, "I want to make it up to you. I know I messed up before." I thought I'd give him a real chance. Things got serious pretty quickly. Gene started doing big, romantic things, buying me expensive gifts and taking me on weekend trips. It was impressive at first, but then it started to feel like a little too much. He bought me a designer handbag that I never would have chosen for myself. He said, "Every woman deserves a little luxury. We are very different people." He kept making jokes about me going to bed early and liking to stay in, saying I had old lady habits. He'd tease me, saying, "You're going to turn into a pumpkin if you stay out past 10 p.m. Cinderella, we said we loved each other. A year after we started dating, we moved in together. He picked the apartment, a luxury high-rise in a trendy neighborhood. I wanted something quieter and closer to my work, but he brushed it off. He said, "Come on, babe, you'll love the views. And the amenities are insane." Living with him, I saw what his everyday life was like. He played video games all day. He went to the gym sometimes. And he partied every weekend at bars and clubs. He'd come home really late, often waking me up. One time, he brought a group of loud friends back to the apartment at 3 a.m., even though he knew I had to get up early for work. His work situation was interesting. He went to his father's company office twice a week, but only if he felt like it. He was supposed to work from home the rest of the week, but he sometimes didn't even do that. The company belongs to his father, and nobody could tell Gene what to do. It was obvious he only had the job because he was the owner's son. He was proud of it, too. He bragged to his friends about how he had it made and didn't have to work hard. His father was still working there, but he kept telling Gene he'd inherit the business someday and that he had faith in him. Gene has a business degree. I tried to talk to Gene about his work a couple of times. He told me that as long as he was getting paid, I didn't need to worry about his professional life. He added, "You wouldn't understand the pressures of a family business anyway. It's not like pulling teeth, sweetheart." I knew he was contributing money, so I decided not to argue with him. I just tried to ignore the whole weird work situation. One evening, I got home after a long, tiring shift at the hospital. Gene was playing video games, and the apartment was a mess. I asked him if he'd had time to look at some important documents about our lease. He said he'd get to it later and that I was stressing him out during his downtime. He gestured to the video game and said, "Can't you see I'm in the middle of something? This is important, too." I didn't say anything, but I was starting to feel frustrated. My parents are in their early 50s. I've been helping them out with money. It was the right thing to do, and I wanted to. I could afford it. I was helping them save for retirement. I paid a couple of their bills every month, whenever I could. They told me I didn't have to, but I kept doing it. Gene and I kept our money separate. I didn't tell him about helping my parents because I didn't think it was important. He never told me how he spent his money. A couple of months ago, he found out I had paid my parents' electric bill. My parents had visited the day before, and they mentioned it in conversation. Gene was acting annoyed during the visit, making little comments about how lucky my parents were to have such a generous daughter. He kept refilling his wine glass and ignoring me when I tried to talk to him. Later that night, after my parents had left, Gene brought it up. He slammed a beer bottle on the counter, which surprised me. He said I should have discussed this with him first. He said I was hiding things from him and going behind his back. He told me I must ask him before sending any money to my parents. He said it was about respect and that, we're a team now. You don't make these kinds of decisions without me. I didn't react well to that. We had a big argument. I told him he had no right to control my money. I told him I didn't owe anyone an explanation for how I spent my money, especially since I earned it myself. I also pointed out that I'd never asked him how he spent his money, like when he was buying his friends' drinks at the bar every weekend. I said, "At least I'm not blowing my money on useless things and acting like a spoiled frat boy." I told him I could afford to help my parents. Gene said that my money was now our money, and he had a say in how it was used. He said, "What's yours is mine, and what's mine is mine. That's how partnerships work, babe." We didn't speak for a few days after that fight. I slept on the couch. I was starting to feel really uneasy. Gene eventually apologized. The apology was short, and it was more about the misunderstanding than about him trying to control me. He said, "I'm sorry we fought. I get worried about money. It's a family thing." He gave me a cheap bracelet as a gift, which didn't look like anything I'd wear. I felt like I had to accept the apology, even though I was still upset. A few weeks later, I suggested we start saving for a down payment on a house. Gene laughed and said we didn't need to worry about that because his parents would probably gift us a property when we got married. He said, "Besides, you wouldn't want to live in some boring suburb, would you? You'd miss the city life." He didn't even ask what I thought. A couple of weeks after that argument, we got engaged. Gene proposed in a very public, showy way, at a fancy restaurant with a lot of his friends there. He got down on one knee, holding a huge diamond ring, and said, "Well, my name, are you going to make me the happiest man in the world, or what?" I felt like I had to say yes, even though I had mixed feelings. I got really busy with wedding planning. I kind of forgot about that argument. Gene didn't really help with the planning, leaving most of it to me and his mother. But he kept criticizing our choices, saying they were too traditional or not classy enough. He didn't want a string quartet at the wedding, saying, "That's so stuffy. We need a DJ who can actually get the party going." He insisted on a big ice sculpture, which I thought was unnecessary. The wedding was scheduled for 6 months after the engagement. We planned to stay living separately until the wedding. 3 days before the wedding, the night before, actually, Gene came to my house, where I was staying. He was about to check into a nearby hotel. He gave me a document and asked me to sign it. He told me to hurry. He seemed uncomfortable and was trying to rush me. He kept tapping his foot and avoiding looking me in the eye. He said, "It's just some legal stuff, nothing to worry your pretty little head about." At first, I thought it was a prenuptial agreement. Then I read it. The document had 3 main clauses. 1. After we were married, I wouldn't be allowed to give any money to my parents or any other member of my family. 2. If we had children, they wouldn't be allowed to be alone with my parents until they were 18 years old. 3. If Gene or his parents thought it was necessary, I might have to cut off all contact with my own family. Gene said the contract was a necessary measure because of the argument we'd had before about my parents' bills. He mentioned that his father was retiring soon, and he would be getting more money. He said he didn't want my parents to think they were entitled to any money. He added, "We need to protect our assets, and you know how families can be. They'll bleed you dry if you let them." He said the clause about the children was just in case my parents tried to use the children against us. He said something like, "You never know what people are capable of. We need to be careful," implying my parents might try to turn our kids against him and his family. He said the no contact clause was for worst case scenarios and that I shouldn't worry about that. He was talking to me like the contract was a completely normal thing. He just asked me to sign it, pushing the pen towards me. I signed it, but I made sure to keep that copy. After I signed the paper, I kept thinking about it and my mind was going a mile a minute. I couldn't fall asleep that night. I stayed up late, reading the contract over and over. The next day was the wedding. I went through with all the preparations. I just pretended everything was fine. I got my hair and makeup done and put on the dress. I walked down the aisle. It felt like I was watching it all happen from far away. When it was my turn to say my vows, I asked my maid of honor for my purse. I took out the contract. Everyone looked confused. They probably thought I had written down my vows. Gene and his parents looked alarmed. Gene's father started to stand up. I began reading the contract out loud. I read through all the clauses very carefully, making sure everyone heard each word. I announced that this was what Gene had made me sign the night before. Then I said I wasn't in love with him. I called him a man-child. I said, "You're a selfish, controlling, entitled brat, and I refuse to spend another minute of my life with you." I looked right at his parents and called them privileged douchebags. I ripped the contract into tiny little pieces. I threw the pieces of the contract at Gene's face. A piece of paper landed in his mouth, and he sputtered and tried to call me back. He was yelling, my name. "What the hell are you doing?" I grabbed my parents' hands. They looked shocked, but they squeezed my hands tightly. We walked out together. I didn't look back. We got into my parents' car and drove to their house, my childhood home. It was a quiet ride. My mom was crying in the back seat, and my dad was trying to comfort her. When we got home, I changed into something more comfortable, an old sweatshirt and sweatpants. I took off all my makeup. I sat down with my parents. My father told me they were incredibly proud of me. My mother was crying too much to speak clearly, but she was nodding in agreement with my father. She said, "We love you, honey. We'll always be here for you." I've been staying at my parents' place ever since the wedding. That evening, Gene called me. He yelled and cursed at me. He called me a gold digger and manipulative, and said I'd ruined his life. I didn't care. I hung up on him. Then I got a tearful voice message from the woman who would have been my mother-in-law. She said I had made a mockery of her and her family publicly. She said the contract had been presented in private, and I should have rejected it privately. She called me ungrateful and classless, and said I had brought shame on their family. She was crying the whole time. So, Reddit, was I really the one in the wrong here? Update 1. I wanted to give a quick update. I posted here on Reddit about what happened. I don't think I did anything wrong. I might have been a little bit impulsive and impractical, but that's a whole lot different than being selfish, cruel, or disrespectful. And honestly, I don't care if some people disagree with me. Most people seem to think I did the right thing. I keep thinking back to that argument about the electric bill, and it just makes me even more sure I made the right choice. Gene and I had to talk about splitting the costs of the canceled wedding. We had to deal with the caterers, specifically. He tried to make me pay more, saying it was all my fault and that he was losing a lot of money because of what I did. He even threatened to sue me. I told him to go ahead and try. I don't regret the money I lost. If I'd canceled the day before, I would have saved some money, but whatever. At least I have a pretty crazy story to tell now. Update 2, another update. The wedding expenses, the caterers, are finally paid off. It took a lot of arguing and even getting lawyers involved, but we finally agreed to split the costs in half. It's a relief to have that over with, even though it was expensive. Gene has blocked me. I found out when I tried to message him about getting some of my belongings back. I've been feeling a lot of different things. I'm relieved, but I also feel kind of empty. I spent years thinking we were in love. Now, I don't really know what to do without him. A part of me actually wants him back, which I know is ridiculous considering everything he did. I'm almost ashamed to admit that. I've been getting a lot of "you're so fabulous" texts from people, which is nice, but it doesn't really change how I feel inside. I'm just feeling numb. I can't really talk to anyone I know about this in person. I don't want to make things awkward or uncomfortable for them. So, any advice on how to deal with this kind of heartbreak? LOL. Update 3, it's been about a month since the wedding. I went back to the apartment we used to share to pack up the rest of my stuff. It was my last time going there. Gene wasn't home. A friend of his, Troy, was there and let me and a friend of mine in. Troy was acting really uncomfortable and made a few comments about how I'd overreacted and ruined a good thing. He said, "Gene's really messed up about this, you know. He really loved you." My friend and I packed up my things. I noticed that some of my stuff was missing or damaged, Like a favorite book with pages ripped out and a smashed picture frame. I'm pretty sure Jean did it, but I didn't say anything to Troy. We just left as soon as we could. Before I left, Jean's friend gave me a note from Jean. Troy handed it to me and said, he wanted you to have this, but he didn't seem happy about it. The note was an apology from Jean. He apologized for what he'd done and how he'd treated me. He said I'd always been even-tempered and shy, which is funny, because it shows he never really understood me. He said things must have been pretty bad for me to react the way I did. He said we were both immature during the relationship, and that we cared more about being in a relationship than about each other. He said he hoped we could meet up again sometime in the future, when we were both in a better space. The letter was bittersweet. I don't think we'll ever get back in touch. The damage is done. The apology seemed like he meant it, but he still didn't really acknowledge the main problem, his disrespect and his need to control me. It felt like he was trying to make it seem like we were both equally responsible for what happened. I crumpled up the note, then smoothed it out again. I'm not really sure how I feel about it. I've rented a new apartment. It's near my parents' place. It's smaller and not as fancy as the old apartment, but it's cozy and peaceful. I feel safe and relieved being closer to my family. I can visit them whenever I feel lonely. I'm going to focus more on work. I'm sad, but I'm also looking forward to being single. Thinking about it, reading Jean's letter stung. I know that I also made some mistakes. Update 4, it's been 6 months since the almost wedding. I got a promotion at the hospital. I'm now the head of my department. I think it's because I'm able to focus on my work now, and I'm not constantly stressed and worried like I was with Jean. My social life is much better. I've reconnected with old friends, and I've made new friends. I feel much more confident and outgoing than I have in years. I even went dancing with my friends, something I never would have done when I was with Jean. My relationship with my parents is stronger than ever. I'm still helping them out financially, but it's different now. We have dinner together regularly, and they're always there to support me. Something surprising happened. Jean's father contacted me. He offered me a job at his friend's dental hospital. He said my skills would be a good fit there and that he always thought I was a good, smart girl. I turned him down. It would have been a major conflict of interest, and I just don't want to be involved with that family in any way. And then, I ran into Jean. It was at a coffee shop near my new apartment. He looked not great. He'd gained weight, and his clothes were wrinkled. He tried to talk to me, apologizing again and saying he misses me a lot. He told me he's been having trouble at work, and his father is thinking about selling the company because Jean can't handle it. He said he realizes now how much he messed up and how good I was for him. I was polite, but I didn't give him much. I told him I'd moved on and that I wished him well, but I wasn't interested in getting back together. I left without saying much else. I felt a little bit of pity for him, but mostly, I just felt relieved that I'm not stuck in that situation anymore. This whole thing has made me realize how much I've grown and how much happier I am without Jean's negativity and control in my life. It was a tough decision, but I know I did the right thing. I feel a sense of closure and peace about it all. Update 5, it has now been a year since the wedding that never happened. I just went on my first date. It was really casual, just coffee with someone I met. It was a bit strange and definitely new, but I was happy, excited, and only a little bit nervous. I have been going to therapy, and, wow, it has helped so much. My therapist has helped me work through the whole mess with Jean, build my confidence, and learn how to set healthy boundaries. I have finally realized my self-worth. I'm actually looking forward to the future.